And we're going to be sorting out slides and stuff and just introduce our speaker. So Michael Bowen, we're very glad to have him here at UAB for this couple of days that he's been here. Invited to do the DRC plenary yesterday and kind enough to agree to come and do the fellows meeting this morning. So I pitched this as a very informal kind of do what you want opportunity. Michael Bowen did his undergrad at Vanderbilt, right, and medical school, and then did Peds residency at Vanderbilt and did their VA quality scholar. So he's been through a fellowship much like this, but at Vanderbilt, and then went to UT Southwestern and joined faculty there in general internal medicine. And his research interest is sort of, I'm sure he's a little bit better than me, but at that sort of intersection between primary care and practice and chronic disease management and trying to figure out how do we make things work better for patients and for clinicians. While at UT Southwestern also did a master's in health science and got a certificate in informatics, medical informatics, something informatics, I get the words confused, informatics, and is just going to talk to us today a little bit about his journey and a little bit about what he does. And so super informal, we're glad to have him here, so use this as an opportunity to ask questions as you guys are thinking about your own sort of path.
Well, thank you. So good morning, and so I've got slides. We don't have to use them, but I made them mostly for me to remind myself what to talk about. But if you guys have questions as we go along, please, chime in and ask things. But just kind of in your training programs, who would say you are just starting your training program? You can raise your hand. Who is in the middle of your training program? And who would say I'm almost out of here? All right, so so it's a good spread, and so what I decided to do today was kind of talk about like this transition from like I'm a fellow, and then how do I get a job, and then what actually happens when I get the job, because it's kind of this big black box. It's actually kind of scary. So I really think like this is really the. See the score. All right, we can move this way.
Okay.
Yeah, the slides are not working at all, actually.
Is it? Oh, it's not. Oh. You gonna try it now?
Right. There we go. All right, so really this is kind of like an escape room. So I'm gonna use that analogy a little bit, but I think you'll kind of understand as I go through it. So, so who am I? How did I get here? So in undergrad, I did a brief foray into basic science working on T. cruzi, and I quickly decided I didn't like pipettes. I did it long enough to graduate, get my honors thing, but then I went on to med school and I realized that starting seeing my patients that I was really interested when this patient came in and he had type 1 diabetes and he was blind, he had an amputation, he was 20 years old, and everybody's like, oh, he's back. And I was like, why is he back? And nobody actually gone and talked to him. And when we went and talked to him, he was like, well, I can only take one shot a day. And I was like, well, why can you only take one shot a day? And he was like, well, I can't see. He was like, I can't give myself my shots. He was like, I can only take a shot when somebody's home and everybody in my house works, so I get one shot a day. And it's like, oh, it's like, has anybody ever talked to you about this before? And he was like, no. And I was like, okay, we have failed this guy. So I really got interested in kind of, public health type stuff. And then for my MPH work, ended up doing a lot of work in pharmacoepidemiology and observational studies. In med peds, my residency, I started doing some diabetes quality improvement. And then went on to fellowship, did more quality improvement, and also had kind of this opportunistic foray into implementation science through a project that I was working on. So what do you do in your fellowship? So I would argue that fellowship is a time for you to learn and use your research skills and methodology, but more importantly, really to define yourself and who you are and who you want to be. And ultimately, you want to think about this in the context of where am I going and how do I develop my research questions and my future niche, because that's what you're going to need to market yourself to get your job. And ultimately, the question has to be fundable. So there's tons of questions. There's tons of interesting questions. There's questions that are not answerable. They may not be answerable where you are, but they may be answerable somewhere else. But the bottom line is, if you want to be a research scientist, you have to get funded, right? So, and this is tricky. So how do you actually move from like, oh, I've got a great question, to I've got a fundable question? So how do you think about what is a fundable question, finding your focus? So I think the easiest thing is, you read and you know people and you know your area, but you really want to look for where these gaps are in the knowledge. And once you find the gap, you want to push as far out as you can. You almost want to get to the cliff. And you're like, we don't know anything else. And when you get to that cliff where you're like, we don't know what to do next, ask yourself, do I like that place or do I need a different cliff? Because there's lots of cliffs out there, but you want the cliff that you're going to be able to jump off. Because when you jump off, that's what you're going to do. And then you have to be willing to fail. Some of these things don't work out. And you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, it's kind of the fake it till you make it almost. There's a lot of things that I don't know. I pretend like I know sometimes. That's everybody in this room. But it's okay, because that's why you work with other people to fill in those gaps. And you may think that you want one thing, but have your eyes open and really be agnostic, both to disease process. I mean, so for many of you, I would say, if you have a disease type, that's okay. But if you're really a methodologist, say like, I've got a method. Where is the best opportunity to apply this method? Because you can always branch out later, okay? And then you need your question to be broad. So it's easy sometimes to focus on the specific thing you want to answer, and like go really like narrow and answer this question. But ultimately, for your career, you need to step it back up and say, okay, this is a question that I have. There's hundreds of potential small questions under this question, because that's when you know you've hit the right spot. So faculty or fellow to faculty transition. So have any of you gone out and given job talks yet? Try. Does anybody have one scheduled? Nobody? Being shy? Okay. So, ultimately, like when you go out on the market, you're most likely going to have to take your body of work and fellowship, put this together, and make a job talk. And this is your pitch. This is, who am I? What do I know? What have I done? Who have I worked with? And then at the end, you really need this to funnel into kind of like, what am I going to do? And that really is where you want your overall research question and focus to be kind of synthesized as best you can. Now, if you're staying at your home institution or wanting to stay at your home institution, this is easy because you can kind of continue oftentimes on what you've been doing. You know the people, you know what you're targeting, right? You know like the opportunities, and you're like, I'm gonna fill that hole. But if you're going external, it's really hard to know what's there, what are my opportunities, what do they need, and what resources are available to make me successful. So like your fellowship mentors are saying, figure out who you are and what you're gonna do, and you're like, what am I aiming for? I don't know if they need what I'm gonna do, or if I can do what I wanna do. So how do you reconcile this? So you're a blind fellow. If you go external, you may actually not find a place where you can do the work you propose in your job. That's what happened to me, right? And you may say, well, what the heck am I doing? Why am I wasting my time interviewing at this place, right? Because you don't want to be narrow and short-sighted saying, this is who I am, this is what I want to do. I got to find the perfect fit, because most often it's going to be really challenging to find the perfect fit for that, okay? So you're not wasting your time. So the question is, what are you looking for, right? So finding the right fit. So we all think about these things. So we all think about location, family, cost of living, how much am I going to make? It doesn't matter if you're doing research for these things, or if you are corporate, or if you're going to work in public relations, or whatever it is. Those things are important. We all know that, right? And honestly, location, family, lifestyle, those often come first, especially if you have other family that you're considering in your move. But what you really want to know is, what about the institution, okay? So institutional reputation is important, but it's not everything. okay? So oftentimes people want to go and say, oh, I've got to go to Hopkins, I've got to go to Harvard, UCSF, Vanderbilt, whatever these places are. That's important, but it's not critical. What's really important is your boss and your mentors, okay? So you want to think about how well can I communicate with my boss and my mentor? Are they responsive to my needs? Do they understand me? And most importantly, will they put you in a position to succeed? And for most researchers, especially if you are a clinical researcher and an MD or a clinician, like I am, that means protecting your time. So you'll find positions where it's like, oh, we want you to do this, we want you to do that. But when it comes down to it, it's like, when are you going to do that? They're like, well, you're going to work 50, 60% clinical, and the rest of the time you can do your research, or 80% clinical, the rest of the time you can do your research. I would argue that that's limiting your opportunity for success, right? So you really want the flip, where somebody's saying, we're going to invest in you and let you do this. So the package. So what do you really need to launch your career, okay? I would argue time early on is most important, right? So protected time to think, develop yourself, your questions, network, you know, do those early research studies that are going to get you to the next funding step. And then, you know, also for most institutions, you will get some startup funds, okay? Some discretionary funds where you can use. And, you know, we tend to focus on the dollar amount, but also you want to look at what is the shared infrastructure and resources that you have access to. You may not need to buy a statistician or pay a statistician if there is a CTSA where you can use the statistical resources as part of your support package, right? So it's important to identify what do you need, what's free because the institution is invested in the infrastructure and you can use it, versus what do you need, right? And then those discretionary funds you take and you say, you know what, I really need access to this data set, it costs money. I'm going to go buy that. Or I need to recruit some patients. We know that's going to cost some money. I'm going to use my discretionary funds to buy that. And then lastly, the environment and culture. Look at your colleagues and the people you're interviewing with. What are they doing? Are they successful? Are they happy? Okay. And I would argue that culture is really important. So you want to be happy when you come to work. There are a lot of places where you can do great science, but if you're miserable when you show up, or you feel like people are going to stab you in the back or undercut you, that's at least not what I want. So how do you get what you want? So negotiation is always like this black box, and we're scared of it. The most important thing is to know what you want, because if you don't know what you want, you can't get what you want. It sounds very simple, but you know, we tend to focus on these obvious things, but you know, you have to know that, and that's how you feel that you win or you got what you needed, right? And so you need to define that for yourself before you sit down at the table with your, you know, potential boss or mentor to really think about that. And then most importantly, think about what is it going to take for you to succeed, okay? Oftentimes we focus on how much am I going to make? What are you going to pay me, right? There's not that much difference from most of us, okay? What you really want to know is, are you going to give me what I need to succeed? So you can negotiate better startup funds, protected time, resources, and access to things, because they want you to succeed. They don't necessarily want to pay you more money, but they will pay more money to help you succeed, okay? What do you need to do your research, okay? You know, and then I think, you know, also what is your value and what is your risk? So, you know, ideally you're going to be bringing something unique to the place that you are interviewing at. A skill set, a clinical niche, or whatever it may be. You want to know what that is, and you're trying to figure out how is that going to fit, right? But you also carry risk, right? Because if they're hiring you to do research, and I'm speaking from the clinician point of view here, you know, as a clinical researcher, an MD, if I'm not seeing patients, I'm not making them money. So there is risk in hiring me unless I already have funding attached to me, right? So you need this period where you can get funded and have protection. So, you know, the risk is I don't get funded, right? So you want to think about if you're going into your job interview and you have things that you're like little bit nervous about this. Maybe it's how many publications you have had. Maybe it is who you worked with, or you're changing your focus, or these things. You're going to think about how that risk is going to be perceived so that you can present that as, you know, positive as you can, or an opportunity, or at least make it clear to them why you only have 1 or 2 papers instead of 5, right? Because those are things that people look at as kind of benchmarks for, you know, can this person move forward to the next step? So you have options. So begging because you have no options is not an option, right? So you really need options, and really you need your BATNA. So does anybody know what a BATNA is? So it's your best alternative to negotiate an agreement, right? So this is what I want. If I can't get it, I've got a backup. So you always want to make sure that you have a backup in your pocket. So you're going to need to go to multiple places so that you ultimately have a place that's like, I would really like to be here. If it doesn't fit, I'm going to be pretty happy here, right? That's your goal. You know, and when you negotiate, you want to communicate well, right? It's a give and take. It's really about mutual wins. You know, if it's a negotiation and one person wins, it's a failed negotiation, because the other person's always going to feel slighted, and they're going to have that chip on their shoulder or that resentment, and you don't want to carry that into your job, right? So you want to make sure that whatever you're negotiating for, hey, you give me this, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to do this for you, because that's how you set up this relationship from the beginning. And don't bluff. Like, you see this all the time, and it's easy to call BS. If you're buying a car, it's fine to bluff. But like, for this purposes, like, it's a small world. People are going to know where you end up. They're going to know who you talked to, who you interviewed with. So I would advise you not to try and play the bluff card and pretend like you've got more than you do. And lastly, even if it seems like the perfect fit, don't accept anything on the spot. You always want to go back and think about it. And if somebody says no, that really just means not yet. That's what you need to tell yourself. I can come back and try this. So how did this work for me, right? So I was doing my search in 2012. So I'd done residency, quality scholars fellowship. I was coming out, I was looking for an opportunity in diabetes research. And my job talk was actually on care coordination. Ooh, that's kind of cool. At the intersection of primary care and specialty care. Okay, that was my job talk. I'd done some work on that fellowship. It's kind of where I landed. I wasn't sure if that's really what I was passionate about, but it's what there was in the minute, and I had to pitch it because it's what I had, right? So, but the economic collapse. Many academic medical centers actually were not hiring at all. Like, some institutions had, you know, less than $100,000 cash on hand, which means you can't hire anybody. I mean, it was a mess, right? And so I knew I needed multiple offers. I needed to find a place that I could be happy. And so I sent out like 20 letters because I was like, this is gonna suck. This is gonna be really hard. And like, I got 5 interviews or job offers. I did like 4 phone interviews. And phone interviews are nice because you kind of, it's like the preliminary like date for the dance. You know, I mean, I talked to some people who are like, oh, we'd love for you to come here. You can be successful. You know, our model is you do clinic until you're funded. And I was like, thanks, bye, right? Because I knew that's not what I wanted, right? So, but I didn't waste my time and their time by traveling up there and doing all these things, because time is our biggest commodity. So, you know, I ultimately did 5 interviews. And so I gave my job talk. And, you know, this was really what my interest and opportunity was, more so than what I saw the feasibility of success. It's what I had to sell. So this is why it's important in your fellowship to think about, you know, you may not be working right now on exactly what you're going to do in the future, but you have to be a creative packager. And you have to be able to tell a story and package that science into something where people can look at it and say, you know, they can do good work, they know good methods, and they can be successful, right? It's okay if they pivot. They've proven they can do this. So I went to UT Southwestern, which is where I am, and they said, we like you, we want to offer you a job. And I was like, awesome, that's great. I was like, I like a lot of things about your place. And then they said, and you know you can't do that here. And I was like, oh. You know, and this is the, you don't know what they need, right? So it's a completely different clinical culture than I came from. It's like a foreign beast, right? And so, you know, but for me, the institution checked most of the boxes that I needed and I wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it hit the right boxes for what I needed at the time, right? So I took the job. And I'm now going into the job and I'm like, okay, I just spent 3 years working on all this stuff. I just prepared this job talk and nobody cares, right? But that's not true. So I had a great job. I got 80% protected time, a 3-year startup package. I got a KL2 spot to cover my salary, had a good mentor. And most importantly for me, there weren't that many people there doing what I was doing. And so I had a giant sandbox where I could just look around and pick where I wanted to plant my flag and say, this is my spot, okay? So that was really nice for me. So then I started to panic. And it's like, oh, I've got to use what I have now to figure this out. And this is where you really feel like you're trapped in the escape room, right? Because, you know, you need to find a research question and get funded. And I'm like, okay, the clock started. They gave me some money. They gave me a job. I've got 3 years. I don't know anybody. What am I going to do, right? So I had 3 years to do this, to get out of the escape room. You're going around the institution. People are saying, oh, there's this opportunity over here. You should try this. You should try that. You can't. You're trying to put the puzzle together, but you don't even know what this puzzle's supposed to look like. There's no guide. And you've got all these people in your institution that you don't know because you just got here, right? So, I mean, this is really daunting. And you'll probably find yourself in this position, most likely. I mean, I know a lot of people stay where they train, but if you go externally, you're going to probably hit this. So how do you get out of the escape room? Well, first, this is why it's important to select a good mentor with your job. So meet with them a lot. Get to know them. So I got to know my mentor really well. He was great for me. He gave me guidance, and he was like, look, you need to meet with this person. He was like, you may not know why you're talking to them, but this is why I want you to talk to them. It's like, I don't know this person, but I know a person who knows this person. You need to meet with this person, right? So you're having your mentor actually kind of define what that puzzle is supposed to look like for you and define the box where you go. So you just got to learn what's going on at the institution. You got to walk around, you've got to integrate, you've got to go to conferences, and you've just got to have your eyes open and your ears alert because there's stuff that will fall all over the place. And really, this is where you got to come back and you got to figure out, okay, like, I'm interested in this. Where is the edge? And ask others where the edge is. So if you know, like, I'm interested in diabetes and screening, go talk to the people who do that and say, well, where does this fall apart? What do we not know? What do we not do well? Get their opinion on that, right? Because if you're talking to the right people, those are the people who are reviewing your grants. They know these things. They're out there on the review panels, right? So they can give you clues. And then most importantly, perhaps you need to figure out what and how you think, right? So thinking may not be in your office with your computer. Thinking might be going for a hike in the woods. It might be training for a marathon and running in silence. You know, it might be sitting on your couch. That's different for everybody, but you got to figure out how do you have time to think. And lastly, you pray. So where did I end up? So, so at my core, I'm a primary care doc. This is trendy. Okay. I'm a primary care doc and practicing where I practice then. And when I started my job, I saw a lot of frustration with the electronic health record. I'm pragmatic from my quality improvement training, and I want to fix problems. I want to fix problems in clinical settings. And I had the outcomes in health services training from, doing my MPH in methodology. And then I dabbled in this implementation science field. And this is kind of how do you take, an intervention that you've proven to be efficacy and take it into practice and implement it so that people can use it, right? So as I thought about this, I realized that kind of like, that's where I like to sit, is kind of in the middle of all those things, right? And so you may identify yourself as kind of, oh, as a methodologist, I am, here, this is what I know. But ask yourself, what else do you like? Because a lot of times you can find the coolest questions where different disciplines intersect and overlap, because there's lots of people that do outcomes and health services research. But there's less people who have quality improvement and do outcomes and research. And then there's even fewer people who put the implementation science on it, right? And so even as you think about your field, as you start to merge those disciplines, you can really develop your skill set and your niche to really get to the edge and say, like, when you interview with people, ooh, they can do some stuff. We've got people kind of like them, but they can do some different stuff, right? And that's what makes people excited, and that's what makes it fun, I would argue. So how did I get to my research question? So I started, and I don't know what I'm going to do, and I'm in clinic. And so I've got my quality improvement training, and I'm just kind of minding my own business. I'm in clinic, and this guy walks in, and he had never seen a primary care doctor. He had been at our institution for a long time, and he had had a bone marrow transplant. He was a cancer survivor, 7 or 8 years out, saw a bunch of specialists. And I'm like looking through his labs, and I was like, oh, you got diabetes? I was like, no, I don't. Yeah, you did. He was like, no. He was like, you check my blood sugar all the time, meaning the institution. He's like, nobody's ever told me I have a problem, right? And so for those of you that aren't clinical or don't think in terms of blood sugar, so this is, kind of 100 here, which is where, arguably the normal blood sugar should be. If you hit 200, which is up there, that means you have diabetes. Even if you're just walking around, talking, if you have symptoms, you have diabetes. And then 160, which is there in the middle, is pretty darn high, okay? That every dot on here is a blood sugar value that we had checked. This is all sitting there, it's available. And so this is going back to 2002. I'm seeing him over here in 2012, and sure enough, he had diabetes. And so I was like, how did we miss this, right? I was like, this is a quality problem, right? I was like, this is just bad care. I feel bad, right? And I was like, but it's also an interesting research problem, because as you think about it, from a clinical standpoint, most clinicians would argue we don't know what any of those values mean because we don't know what the patient did before we had the blood sugar check. So the tendency is to say, oh, you just had like a croissant and a bagel, let's, it's okay, we'll let it slide, right? So we don't have normal parameters around these values, so what do we do with these? So it aligned kind of the quality, it aligned the science, and this was actually kind of the edge of knowledge, because I was like, every patient who goes to the doctor for this record gets a blood sugar in the entire country. And start looking in the literature, what do we know about this? And I was like, ooh, this is an interesting opportunity. So it really aligned for me in this kind of just moment of pure serendipity, right? Because I like diabetes, it was a quality problem. I had the training to make sense of the data and use the data. And it was really ripe for kind of pragmatic EHR solutions, which is one of my frustrations that I wanted to tie in. So, we did that, and like to transition this, so like, we have the clinical data, and I'm like, well, we don't know a lot about this. How can I prove that this is a good idea, right? How can I get people, it's like, surely somebody's thought of this before, right? If you think you're the first person that's thought of a research question, you're probably wrong. You have to ask yourself, did somebody else think of it and decide it was a bad idea, it wasn't doable, or they just couldn't do it, that it really needs to be done, right? So I kind of was like, okay, this is so obvious. What the heck am I going to do with this? I was like, this is just really a bad idea. So I went to NHANES, which is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. Free data, with, early faculty. I'm not trying to burn through my stuff. Free data. I pay an analyst, and I start doing this. And my goal was to basically demonstrate that using these non-diagnostic random glucose, they're associated with undiagnosed diabetes and prediabetes. And they were, right? Makes sense. Diabetes is high glucose. If you ignore a glucose that's somewhat high, that person might have diabetes. And then I frame this as a quality problem, right? So QI background, patient receiving care in a healthcare system. We missed a diagnosis, that's bad care, bad quality, right? It's a safety issue. And so the state of Texas actually had pilot funds specifically for quality. So I put in a grant saying, hey, you know what? We shouldn't miss this. We need to understand how and why we missed this and develop a new way to detect this. And I got 2 years of pilot funding, $100,000 from UT System, which is great. Now, it saved me my startup funds, but also it gave me validity, right? So my institution was like, oh, you've got an early success. People get excited. But most importantly, it gave me preliminary data down here that I could pull from the EHR to actually move forward to the next step of my career development award. So I went to go for my K application, my career development award. I had this preliminary data, but I never actually published a paper with my mentor, which is a little bit different because I hadn't been there that long. We just met. So, but I had an idea that I was excited about. And everybody that I talked to said, oh, this is a good idea. This is really innovative. You should do this. They're like, put in your grant. And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to put in the grant. I don't know if it's going to get funded. But I put it in, and it was a reminder to me that the innovation section of your grants and how excited people get about it and the potential impact is really what carries it. Because the science in the grant was good, but it wasn't rocket science. But it was the potential impact on clinical care, and it was funded on the first round. So for me, the goals of my K award were basically understand this glucose history, that timeline I showed you in the EHR. We did a screening study, and the goal of that was actually to take the EHR data and say, let's develop a risk score that we can use to decide who we need to test. And then lastly, we want to put that into practice and learn how we can use this and get preliminary data in A3 to move towards the bigger grant, which is the next one, right? So you're always thinking one step ahead towards what's next. So how do you do the work? So I got the grant. K awards for physicians pay your salary, which is really important because it keeps you on clinic, right? They don't give you much money for research. They give you like $50,000 a year for research, which goes really fast, right? So this is where you want to know those institutional resources, because your mentor may not have like just dollars that they're just going to dump on you and say, do this, right? Because unless you have a really well-funded mentor and your area is really aligned, my mentor doesn't do diabetes. My mentor actually does more cancer than diabetes and used to do carotid endarterectomy stuff, right? So I can't go and say, hey, you've got this diabetes data set, you've got all of this stuff, let me use this. This is where you need to go and leverage the institutional resources. And if you get people excited, they'll do stuff. So I paid to get my data, and we had a P Corps grant, which was a research infrastructure grant that supported comparative effectiveness research. And so it had funds in there to pay an EHR extract analyst. And so my mentor was like, look, we're already paying this person. Your project is cast under this. We're going to frame it as this. They're going to work for you and help you with your data pool, right? So I saved money, okay? And for the IT build part of this, so I needed to build stuff in Epic. Like I had money to do that because I was like, there's no way they're going to do this for free because they do this all the time. But I was shocked when I went and I was like, hey, look, this is what I want to do. I talked to the CMIO, who I knew, who's an internist, and they're like, oh, this is really exciting. This is really cool. This can really help our health system. They built it for free. So I've actually never paid an EHR build person to build anything that I built, because the alignment between what the science, what I'm excited about, but it improves care hopefully, and my sell to them was, hey, I'm going to tell you if this works. You don't really know if most of the stuff you build works, right? You just put it there and you know that you annoy a lot of people, right? So it's like, let's figure out if this works, and we're going to give you some data. We're going to get clinician feedback. We're going to say, oh, it'd be better if you do it this way, and I'm going to help you learn, but you're going to help me by building this and saving me money that I really don't have, right? And so all of this really worked out. And then you want to look for other partners. So I ended up partnering with the Parkland Global's Diabetes Institute. And by doing this, my project tied into a larger institutional initiative. And I actually used clinic champions from their QI projects for my implementation sites. So rather than go out and me trying to bang on the doors and drum up support, there are people there who are already invested and interested in, like, I just need to prove that patients will show up, right? So for my goals for the project, it worked well, and I needed a clinical champion to do that, and that provided me that. So this is the last slide. Has anybody ever seen this before? I see heads nodding. Who hasn't? Okay, you should. So this is like from a book by Stephen Covey. Is it The Secrets to Highly, 7 Secrets to Highly Successful People? Is that the name of it? Blanking. Okay, yes. But this is really helpful. And this is one of those things that you read the book, and the book may be helpful or not helpful, but this matrix is really helpful. Because this is what will derail and destroy you, okay? So you've got the 4 quadrants, right? And where do you want to be? So where do you guys want to be? Where do you want to live your life? Your research life, your home life? What quadrant do you want to be in? You can speak. Urgent, important.
The not urgent and important.
Not urgent and important, but urgent. You want to be in the urgent and important. What's that? So you want it to matter. But how do you feel if you're in the urgent and important quadrant every single day? Stress, right? And do you ever think forward?
Just it's reaction.
You're always just putting out fires, right? And you can't actually step back and think about, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? Where are we going to go on vacation next year? You're just kind of doing those things. So I mean, this is like the clinical emergencies. If you're a clinician, this is like the, somebody's crashing. This is, I've got an important meeting. Oh crap, my kid's sick. I got to go get them. There's nobody to go get my kids. I can't find anybody. Oh, I've got to block the rest of my day, right? This is the kitchen fire. I would argue that's the worst place to be. And I think most people would probably agree, because you're trapped. You can't ever make it through what you need to do because you're always dealing with this urgent thing that's coming up, right? So this is where you want to be, because this is like your strategic planning. This is where you can say, I actually have time to take care of myself and think and exercise, and I can think about who I want to be and develop my career, think forward about my strategy, right? We all have to live in this urgent, not important, right? And these are just the kind of annoyances. These are most meetings, distractions, emails, calls, and things like that. And then there's this not important, not urgent. This is the 11 p.m. sitting on the couch with a beer. This is, your social media, your Google, all of those time wasters that are important because they give you a break, but you got to be cognizant of when they creep in, right? So this is you've got to do it. There's no way out, right? When you're in that quadrant, you're pretty much stuck. You got to do it. This is the planet, okay? This is the delegated, so if you're in this quadrant, it's important, somebody's got to do it, but it's not so important that I have to do it. That's when you're kind of like, hey, let's, is there somebody else who can do this for me or help me with this or go? And then this is really the drop it, right? And so it's easy to, look back at your day, and I have these days too, where you're kind of like, what did I do today? And then you realize you were in that quadrant all day. It happens, it's okay, right? But so you really want to take, by delegating it, you want to move, that gives you free time to move to the planet column. By dropping it, you can move it to the planet column. You can't do anything over here, but your goal is to end up here and be really excited like Homer, right? So that's where you want to be. And so I think that's actually all I have. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but you guys can ask me anything and I will do my best to tell you. I'm gonna grab a seat here. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, so this is like highly relevant to me. One of the things I struggled with was, okay, so you said your job talk, you should sort of sell what you've done in your fellowship. But I kind of got lost in, do I need to sell them in where I'm going and like my aims? So how do you like, you know, balance that?
Yeah, so I think you have to do both. I think it depends on how closely where you're going ties to what you have done. So if like your prior science, if your proposed future science links to your science that you've done in your fellowship, continue that story because that's the story, right? If the science that you did in your fellowship is not really connected to where you want to go and what you're proposing, I would focus on, and these are all suggestions, by the way, so you need to talk to other people, but I would consider focusing on not so much the question or the content, but really focusing on the methods and the product, right? So it's, you know, hey, I did a project in HIV, I'm gonna do diabetes. When I did this project in HIV, I learned how to recruit patients. I learned how to clean data. I learned how to do these things, and those are the skills, you know, that you can use and apply to a different area. So I mean, I think the answer is you have to do both. It just depends on how close it links.
It's a good question. I don't know if others, I'd love to just, my thinking on this is, and I think it's depending on who you interview with and their expectations, but to me this is very similar to a K application where when you're interviewing for a job, the product is you as a person, not the project, right? So the K, the product is you as someone who has the training and has done a little bit of science, but the science doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, you're the product, it's you as this investigator. So my suggestion or my bias is in a job talk, it's more about selling yourself and kind of what you've done shows what you can do, especially when you go into a new place. I think most people realize it's very unlikely you're going to stay on this path because different infrastructure, different resources. So I think most people are looking at the person versus the product, and also the winds of science are so fickle that, you know what I mean, you don't know where it's going to go. So I think really the pitch is who you are, what you've done, presenting yourself as someone who is capable, smart, open-minded, curious, and able to, here's where I think I'm going to go, but I can't go that path. There's any number of paths that I can go down and be successful.
Right. Because I think the question that the people that you're interviewing with, I mean, like your mentor, your division chief, whoever it is, their question is, can I get this person funded if they do not already have funding, right? And so that's, you know, are you a hard worker? Do you have the skills? And, you know, you may not have your, I mean, I didn't, you know, you may not have your research question down, but, you know, I do think it's important that you demonstrate that, hey, I know how to formulate a research question that can be answered. And, you know, I can put together a plan potentially and talk through that because people are going to ask you. It may not be what you do, but it's kind of the like, oh yeah, they kind of know what they're doing, right? And I got something to work with here. So I think that's spot on.
And I think that's important too, because, you know, just as you're going to different institutions, they're looking to see how you know, fits in terms of what their potential portfolio is. And that's going to differ between different institutions. And again, it's like what you're seeing and what they're seeing is one thing. And then when you actually get on the ground, you know, I really think that meeting. And I actually feel like, you know, that continues way past the first couple of years, because that's how you end up having these great collaborations that you might not have even seen when you were interviewing.
And I think scholarly products are also become critical. I mean, it's hard in a two-year postdoc to have a lot of published papers, but I think demonstrating you've done abstracts, you've drafted papers. At the end of the day, I think the big fear when you're taking a risk hiring somebody out of fellowship, I mean, it's just the reality, If it's like, wow, she's smart, talented, interested, but there's always the question of, does she finish? Does, I mean, like, that's always one of those things. So the more you can demonstrate, this is someone that finishes, like combine the skills with the finishing, then you say, yeah, it might go a different way, but I know they're going to be able to deliver and get things done, wherever they kind of land.
And I think it's important to remember too, like you mentioned this, but especially when you're a junior and you just kind of want to get a job, to make sure that you're not just selling yourself, they should be selling themselves too. And so I think that the point that you made about mentorship, even if somebody doesn't turn out to be your main mentor because you don't end up in that content area or whatever, identifying from the very beginning who is going to be your champion, who is going to take care of you and make sure that they help you succeed. You have to know who that person is. You can add to that later, but you have to at least, I think, have one person that you know, this person is invested in me and my success.
Yeah, that was my other question, was sort of like, when you don't know this, how did you find your initial champion mentor?
So I mean, for me, it was almost de facto because for what I do, we're very small. And so in my division of general internal medicine, I was actually the first, even though my boss and my mentor is an outcomes and health services researcher, I was the first faculty member that he hired to do outcomes and health services research in his division. And so the primary mentor was an easy fit. There wasn't, a menu of people that I'm choosing from. I think, things that you want to think about of like, who have they mentored in the past? How successful were they? Did they transition to the next stage of their career? Did they get promotions? Are they willing to think outside the box? Or some people are like, I'll mentor you if you do what I want to do, or if you work in my area. But again, like, my boss doesn't do anything in diabetes. He was like, that's okay. He was like, I've got, the knowledge and skills, and, I can get you through this. And I felt comfortable with that, right? And I also felt like I knew enough about diabetes and kind of my skill set that I wasn't dependent on him for that. Now, I filled that by finding an endocrinology mentor at the institution that provides that for me. But that was kind of a secondary step, because that's not the person, as Andrea said, that's not the person who at the end of the day, if I crash and burn, they're going to crash and burn with me, right? And I mean, you really kind of want to feel that, like, if you fail, you want them to feel like they've all failed with you, because that's the relationship that you want. There's some places, I think, they have a lot of people, they have a lot of junior faculty. People can get lost in the fray. And they kind of expect that not everybody's going to make it. I don't like that, right? I want to go to a place where it's like, my success is your success, right? And so, I think size is important too. And I think that's where I put up there, like, name isn't everything. So some of the big names, in my opinion, like, they do great science, but they've got so many people doing so many things that, as a new person, if you're not laser focused and know where you're going and what you're doing, you can get lost. And the bandwidth for mentorship and collaborations drops just because the saturation level is high. And so there's nothing wrong with those places if they're right for you. But for me, like, that's the way I look at it.
One thing you said that really resonated, that I heard folks talk about a lot, is in the negotiation, thinking about what are the non-dollar human resources and infrastructure. And I would say for me, that is almost more important. I think in the era of where science is, especially the kind of science that we do in team science, a pile of money is not nearly as valuable as an infrastructure where existing data analysts, biostats that we collaborate, folks to do those kind of, to engage with. And I think sometimes it gets lost in this era of, because a lot of this is still traditional, you're coming in, you're going to get your lab, here's your, your wet lab, money, startup, N of one, like, I'm going to become the next alpha, laureate, and that's just not where our sciences. And so I think a lot of times I will say when I was interviewing coming out of fellowship, I was less focused on how many dollars are you even getting to give me in the startup package and more, is there data? Because I mean, I need to be productive fast. These 3 years go really quickly, or 2 years, and I've got to have all the money in the world to build an infrastructure. By the time I build that infrastructure, I got to think slow. So I thought that really resonated with me, and I have heard a lot of folks talk about that. So much emphasis on, I think, the dollar. Money's great too. I mean, it's great you need some money to be able to do some of these pilot things. I'm not saying it's not an either or, but boy, you got all the money in the world, and without some established infrastructure, it's an uphill climb.
Yeah.
And I think it's very hard to, you know, you have to find some people to talk to that are safe to talk to about that, because, I mean, looking back, I wish I had thought more about that in my first faculty position. It just wasn't, you know, nobody, it's the things you wish somebody had told you. And so now when I talk to people, you know, we really start thinking about, like, how do you envision what are the resources that you need, the ones that are not tangibly, you know, monetary are super important. And that can be really, I think it's hard. I feel like, I mean, I've done it before, you've done it before, and it's still hard unless you have, you know, a few safe people that you can sit down and hash it out. The other thing, when you were talking about negotiation, I think particularly, you know, I mean, I think this is true for some guys, it's definitely true for a lot of women, that we don't think about negotiation in the way that we probably should, and we have to learn to how to value what we're bringing to the table and ask appropriately for the things we need. So those are things that I think you can, you know, like exercising. If you're running a marathon, you're not going to just do a mile run every day and think you can run a marathon. I think being able to think about what your strengths and weaknesses are, and even use your K development, the way we structure K is like, what do I have? What do I need in terms of methods and mentorship? Think about your negotiation process like that. That is a whole new skill set to build, because through graduate medical school and postdoc, you're given an offer letter and you sort of take what you've got. That's the model until you get to this faculty position. It's like, I don't even know how much I negotiate. Yeah.
But that's where it's really key to know what you want, right? Because I mean, I think, like, you know, I mean, medical training and clinical training is prescriptive. You never have to actually think. They tell you what comes next. You know the next course. You know when you finish medical school, you've got to go to residency. You have a little bit of a choice about what residency do I do. You finish residency, then it's like, well, do I get a job or do I go to fellowship? They're really binary choices. And then, like, you know, now it's kind of like, oh, great, I just finished fellowship. People think I'm smart, I've worked really hard. What do I want? And that's why you want to be in that correct quadrant, because, I mean, it's not like, you know, I mean, I didn't do a great job of this, but, like, if you finish your fellowship and you've actually never thought about what you want and where you want to go, you've got a lot of catching up to do. So you're going to be thinking about that along the way. And it's a lot of times it's easier to find the things that you don't want. You know, so I mean, I think, like, I remember, like, medical school, like, my first day on OB-GYN, I was like, ooh, this isn't for me. You know, I mean, that was an easy box to check off. I was like, done, right? So you'll find the things that's like, that annoys me. Oh, that's just not interesting. Oh, that's like, you know, kills my brain to think about it. That's okay, check those off and forget about them. They're important. But, like, as you think about what you want, that's where you need to get, because that's how you know what to negotiate for. Because if you don't know what you want, you don't know what to ask for.
I think also knowing, you know, taking some time to really think about how you problem solve, you know, and what insights you. You know, I still do that. You know, like, what, you know, if I'm hearing somebody's research and it's kind of like such an anxiety, and then I, you know, talking with another group, it's like, oh, I would love to allows me to collaborate. And I feel like that, again, you know, things like the K can really help you think about like what your problems, how you want to create things that stimulate you and really choosing. There's certain things that you just can't wait to study and think about problem solve. And just like specialties, kind of like we got an pediatrics.
I agree, this is friendly. We have people who teach negotiation skills. Another part of that, I would say, is if you wait to take it, if they make the offer to you, they're never going to move more than 10% around that. They've now anchored it. That is the offer. So if you don't put out what you need at the outset, and while their mental mind frame is open, you're going to limit yourself pretty dramatically to the point about some of the ratios linked to research and things like that.
But that's where you can also state what you need and walk away. And if they're really interested, they want you, they'll move. Because you're basically telling them, look, this is what I need to be successful with what I want. Now, it may or you mean this is where you have to be reasonable, right? But you know, they may say no on the first time, but you say like, hey, it's all right, this is what I need, this is why I need it. Think about it. Let me know. And you come back together and see where you can go. The book that I put up there, Getting to Yes, is a great book.
Ask for it is also a very good book.
I think one of the things that I've seen from like looking at those books versus like experience with negotiation is that the books sort of assume that the person you're negotiating with knows what they're doing. And that has not been my experience. You know, that most, you know, that you're going to be the person negotiating in like 10, 15 years on the other side. And so like my first department chair, I was just like, I have no idea. Like I wound up with like, I was negotiating raise and wound up with, I had a number in mind, $8,000 more than what I would have asked for. Because she offered me like $6,000 less. And I was like, no. And she said, well, okay, so we can only review this if you have another offer. She's like, do you have another offer? And I was like, how do you want me, and I literally said, how do you want me to answer that? Because you just told me what my only leverage point is. She's like, you have another offer? And I hung up with it. So I mean, realizing that the other person, that like, yes, negotiating is important, but also like, yeah, it might not go as smoothly as in the book because I was just like, okay, like great, yeah.
The other thing I think to keep in mind, and I do like that at least concept in trying to get into yes, is that it has to be a win for everybody. And so I think figuring out what's really important to you and knowing that, you know, there's certain things that you might not want to budge around, and then there's certain things that are just less important. I would put salary, I mean, unless it's like a crappy salary, but you know, most people are going to be in or around the same place for the market that they're in. And so you can't, it's hard to compare, you know, two different salary offers in different cities and different places and different markets. But I think there's certain things that you have to be successful. And you know what you need, and given the kind of work that you want to do. So making sure that you have those things in place and maybe having some flexibility around certain other aspects will allow everybody to feel like they're winning.
And if you'll see, and like some institutions will have the, you know, criteria for promotion, you have to have an external offer. I think that's silly. But I think the reason they want to do that is they're trying to gauge your value. They want to know that you're wanted, right? So, you know, I mean, in that scenario, like you may or may not have had an offer, but you need to realize that your chair's goal, right? Your chair's goal was like, why should I give you a raise? If somebody else is willing to give you a better offer than I can give you, maybe you're more valuable to me than I realize, right? And so that's kind of the opportunity where it's like, prove why you have value to the institution, to your chair, to your department, you know, and that may be, you know, your skills, that's skills, research, clinical productivity, whatever it may be. Figure out what those things are to demonstrate your value so that you're not just asking for something. You're saying, hey, I'm giving you all this stuff. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm bringing value to the table, I need this in return.
To the extent we know these people will someday be managers themselves, back to your earlier point, that's the worst thing to do, to force people out. Because once you're out there and people are whining and dining you and showing you all the best parts of their community, and you're now checked out mentally, and you will lose people. And the price of replacing people is infinitely more than whatever that raise, an $8,000 raise. I would spend that. I'd drop that on the job search like that. So yeah, when you're managers, don't make people do that.
I would say too, you talk about know what you want, but also know what you want in 5 years and in 10 years, and have those goals in mind as you're job searching too, and think about what you're going to need for those long term. So if you can talk to them, well, in 2 years, this is where I want to be. In 5 years, this is where I'm planning to be. It's probably going to change. Nobody ever goes down the right, straight path, or mostly, but I think that that's a fair thing too, to see how they're going to support you incrementally as well.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Happy Friday.
Really quickly, any good stories? I told y'all last week I'm going to keep asking every week. Any fun announcements? Yeah, they're trickling.
We have several folks in the room that were.
Yes, that's very true. We sure do. We were, it's a process. So we're still kind of
Processes.
on pins and needles waiting for the notice of grant award.
Got
But
it.
yes,
Sorry,
absolutely.
I'm premature. I'm a little excited. I'm not gonna say who in the room.
So we have everything in place, but yes, we're
Very well done.
very
So-
extremely happy about the wonderful candidates that we had. So I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thank you. Perfect job.
And next week, I don't recall. I'm sorry. Do you remember what's happening next week in Friday Village?
Is it the panel? No, that's happening. No, I don't remember.
I don't remember.
tuned.
Next week, isn't it? Excellent. There's a fantastic speaker in here, same time, same
Not me.
space. Bye, guys. Have a great weekend.